Did you know that 70% of America's fish and wildlife habitat is on privately owned land? Just like this. That's right, 70%, which is why we owe such a debt of gratitude to the farmers, ranchers, and other landowners who are working to maintain and enhance our nation's rich wildlife heritage. The program you're about to see is a well-deserved thank you note to those people. It was produced through a partnership of farm and conservation organizations who are equally committed to the effort. And it was filmed in high-definition video, so you could experience all of the beauty of their accomplishments. After you have watched the program, I invite you to review and take advantage of the other important material on this DVD. There are brief interviews with the farmers and ranchers featured in the video, a gallery of spectacular habitat scenery from shoots across America, a collection of facts and photos from NRCS publications, and information on how you can become involved, including links to the many public and private organizations that can provide technical and financial assistance. Over the years, particularly in the last 15 years, through conservation programs and partnerships, America's landowners have established literally millions of acres of productive fish and wildlife habitat on working farms and ranches. We celebrate their accomplishment in our program, Land of Life.
It is our most fundamental and valuable resource, the land itself, from which every other resource springs. Yet it wasn't so long ago that our land and the wildlife that depend on it were at risk. For that matter, so were we. And so were future generations, because we all depend on the land for food and fiber, clean water, even the purity of the air we breathe. Fortunately, we recognized the danger as well as the opportunity. We learned, we invested, and through the commitment and stewardship of landowners, conservationists, governments, and organizations across America, millions of acres have come back to life right before our very eyes. You can see it in our wetlands, which support more species of wildlife than any other habitat. You can see it in the lush and growing buffers that farmers are building to protect our lakes, streams, and rivers. You can see it over vast grazing lands where ranchers are using new management practices to bring endangered game fish populations back to life. You can see it all across America, in every state and every county. The vision is working. The commitment is strong. We are proving together that a healthy land is a land of life. As far as we've come, we still have a long way to go. Since 70% of America's wildlife habitat is on privately owned working lands, we must continue to find ways to work together, support each other, and celebrate the efforts of everyone who's getting it done. So here's to the people, to the farmers and ranchers who are bringing our land back to life, and to the many public and private organizations that support them. Here's to the conservationists, scientists, engineers, and technicians who work with them side by side. And to people from all walks of life who share the dream, who love the land, and who are determined to pass it on to future generations. Better, richer, more beautiful, and more bountiful than when we found it. We depend on the land for food and fiber, clean water, even the purity of the air we breathe. So here's to the farmers and ranchers who are bringing our land back to life, and the people everywhere who share the dream, who love the land, and who are determined to pass it on to future generations better, richer, more beautiful, and more bountiful than when we found it. A message from the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Next time you're out in the country and you look across a field and you see a stretch of trees and bushes and natural grasses protecting a stream or a wetland, it's all right to say a little thank you to a farmer or rancher who obviously cares about clean water, soil conservation, and healthy fish and wildlife populations. Next time you're out in the country, you might remember that we depend on privately owned working lands for much more than the food we eat. That's why it's so important to support the efforts of farmers and ranchers who are using conservation buffers to protect our soil, water, and wildlife. You see, conservation is a shared responsibility, a shared opportunity. And if we do our part, well, we can count on nature to take care of the rest. A message from the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Natural Resources Conservation Service and the National Conservation Buffer Initiative.
Our family's been here since about 1880, and I'm fourth generation on my father's side in this valley, and fifth generation on my mother's side. We're primarily a cattle ranch. Do a little bit of farming, but just primarily cow-calf. Obviously, agriculture's focus is generally production, but there's a bigger picture, and the big picture is, there's agriculture making a living on the ground, but there's also water quality and wildlife that are also important to the area. And a lot of these projects the NRCS helps us with, helps design and also cost share, benefit everything within that scope. Better water quality, better range of land conditions, not only benefits us and our cattle production, but also obviously the wildlife. What's good for one is also good for the other. I think probably the focus the last few years has actually been fish and fish habitat. The bull trout in this area is now listed as an endangered species. And so a lot of the, what we've seen or will see today with fish ladders and all is geared at bull trout and the cutthroat, and trying to reestablish them in the watershed. In our case, we haven't set any land aside strictly for wildlife. We haven't put any. We do have some conservation easements, but it isn't set aside land. It's land that we still operate for agriculture, and I believe that with proper management, the cattle and the wildlife can exist together. What I care about is managing the resource sustainably, so that I and my children and their children can still be operating here in the future. Well, I think one of our successes is that we're still in business, and I attribute that a lot to, my father and grandfather before me, that they were able to set the table well enough that, you know, we still have a healthy resource to operate on. And I think that, you know, I've seen the grazing, some of the grazing management, grazing systems being a success with the improvement of the range classification. I have one of the real quick successes is off-stream water. By pulling the cattle off the stream and watering them off the stream, you can see some real quick improvement short-term to the stream. My grandfather in his day was known as a bit of a conservationist, but he did some things at the time that, as a kid growing up, I spent a lot of time with him, that you know, now I recognize was a mistake. Things like putting dams on creeks with no fish passage. At the time, everybody, boy, that's great, you know, because there's great fish in the lake and everything, but then there's no passage for the young of the year to get to the river, you know. And at the time, it seemed like a great thing, and it probably was, but that's one of those learning steps that we learn. At the time, we never, you know, saw that big picture. Today, I'm sure he'd be working, putting fish ladders in and making for transportation and you know, taking that next step. My grandfather said, and I use this myself, and my family uses this, that if we can leave the resource in as good or better shape than we found it, when we pass it to the next generation, then we've been a success.
We've been here since 1980. We taught school before that and then moved back here. My wife grew up here her whole childhood and whatnot. And we came back in 1980 and started ranching. We produce pretty much livestock. We rotate our crops and alfalfa and small grains. Well, I heard of some restoration down in the lower lands, and I got to talking with some people, and I thought, since we were up in the headwaters of the streams where a lot of the sediment and erosion was taking place, I felt, you know, maybe they should come up here and take a look at this, and they felt the same thing, that, you know, maybe if they started up here and restored it and slowed the water down when it went on down the creek, well, it would help, you know. So we, a couple years ago, started on this restoration, and it's really improved, and fish habitat and the vegetation and whatnot has really come with pretty raw banks before. We have about every species that probably on the North American continent. I don't know, we have moose and grizzly bears and mountain lions, elk. We have the elk have been calving here this last week down here in the hay meadows, and a lot of whitetail and mule deer. The mule deer are having a little harder time, but we have about everything. There's mountain goat, mountain sheep, some upland birds, and a lot of fur bearers. So 2 years ago they started on a rehab, and they probably went about 3,000 feet and putting root wads and rock structures and slowing down, and the speed of the creek was just kind of rushing down through here. Now they've slowed it down and made some pretty good habitat for the fish to spawn in, and some shade for them, and might not be quite as hot in these hotter days where there's no shelter or shade on the creek. So there's pretty decent fishing holes in there, and somewhere for them to survive. It was 88 when this land all burnt, and this whole valley down here was solid cottonwood trees from fence line to fence line, and it's been 12 years, and we've just watched the creek kind of erode down. It's washed the creek bed probably 5-6 feet, and now with these structures and whatnot, I think we're gonna see a lot of improvement. You know, we're not gonna see that destruction anymore, I hope.
But yeah, the flames were as high as Haystack Butte, the butte that's behind us. And I think it burned like 147,000 acres in 3 hours. And it had been burning from June till September when we got burned out. We've worked the whole bottom as far as clearing all the big cottonwoods out and burning them and whatever, and then we worked the ground and seeded it back to alfalfa. I can remember picking sticks off those fields for years before we finally got the grass to come. But yeah, it's come good.
Well, I bought this place in 1957. Been right here ever since. Well, what we grow here is cotton, soybeans, wheat, stuff like that. I have 23 acres in the program. I guess this would be kind of hard to believe, but it's the best productive land that I have. So it was good farmland. It wasn't just some land that I didn't care much about. Well, this that's in question here, across the bow, we call it the bow. Now, the time finally came when I couldn't get to it so easy. See, it used to be a bridge down here, and I'd go around, across that bridge. Now I can throw a rock from here over there on it right now. It's just that close to the house here. But that bridge went out, so I just figured it'd be better to try to put it in this program. So I made several trips down there talking with him about putting it in this program, and he kind of helped me along with it. Well, I've never hunted any big game, you know, even though I've seen a few deer on this place. I just enjoy fishing, and I like take my grandkids out there and let them fish. Well, our family doctor, he's passed on now, but he used to come out here every year, and he said, "Did you see a curvy quail?" I said, "Yes, one right back there on that hill." And he'd come out here and hunt quail. I've enjoyed swapping a few with you.
Well, we've been here over 30 years. I moved here in 1962, 61, 62, and we've been here ever since. We have it rented out to the farmer that grows beans and cotton usually every year. This year they have all cotton, I believe. All this low spot right here where the tree line is, I understand is the biggest part of it. They say it's underwater usually when it's planting time, so we went on and put it under the wetlands program. Instead of letting it sit, we can use it for the wildlife and nature.
Back in 1988 and 89, we had a drought. I had a cow-calf, little cow-calf operation going in, and I was out of water and out of hay, so I sold those. And I worked at Iowa State at the time, and I talked to Dick Schultz in the forestry department, and looking for some trees to plant or shrubs or something for wildlife. And He told me to hang on a little bit. He maybe had a project. So this is what it's turned into since 1990. The Iowa State University is actually in charge of the project, and we've got support from the Leopold Center, Pheasants Forever, operations like that. They've got trees, shrubs, and an area of switchgrass planted along each side of the creek to filter the water. This has stopped I'd say 99% of the erosion through. What slows the water down, though. Anytime it rains, the trees and grass and shrubs seem to slow the water down, and it just doesn't wash out like it used to. We tried rocks and everything, years ago to try and keep it from washing, and that didn't seem to do much good, but this buffer strip has really done the trick. Well, it actually takes the chemicals out of the water before it reaches the water table for your drinking water. They've got a small wetland down here where at times the water will run in there I think the nitrates are like 12 to 14 parts per million, and before it gets to the creek it's down to like 1 or 2 parts per million. The last count there was like 40 birds, different species, where there was like 6 or 8 before they did this buffer strip. And there's more deer now right now, and there's beaver, there's a lot more pheasants, and there's a few partridge coming back. This year there was a few little bluegill in the creek that I've never caught before. I don't know where they came from, but they're there. Now, there's a lot of neighbors involved in the project. I had 7 or 8 north and south of me also, and even all the way to town actually right now is involved in this project. But you can listen to the different birds that are out here now where you didn't have any bird actually singing before. You can go out and watch an animal run across in front of you or something, and it makes it pretty thrilling actually.